Unified Facility Criteria UF3460001, August 6, 2010. Unified Facility Design Petroleum Fuel Facilities. Chapter 8, Atmospheric Storage Tanks. 8.1, Introduction. The chapter provides guidance for the design of bulk storage tanks, operating storage tanks, ground vehicle fuel tanks, miscellaneous use of tank provided with recovery system tanks, contaminated fuel storage tanks, jet engines testing, fuel cell fuel storage tanks, design guidance for the issue related to storage tanks such as eye protection, locations, coatings, product recovery, spill, contamination systems are also covered in this chapter. The ballast water storage tanks are covered with Chapter 5. Pressurized tanks for the storage of liquid petroleum gases are covered in Chapter 10 with the USC facility. This chapter generally applies with the new tanks. Refer to the Chapter 12 for the repair and refurbishing existing tanks. 8.2 General Requirements. General design information contains important information on the fueling facility. Do not start designing any fueling system without first becoming completely familiar with Chapter 2 of the UFC. 8.3 General Criteria. The design liquid fueling storage is to comply with the operational requirements of the particular command of the having jurisdiction of the facility, ensuring the design appropriated with the mission of the facility, considering the operational requirements of the user of the fuel. 8.3.1 Materials. All above ground storage tanks shall be constructed with steel and concrete encased steel. 8.3.2 The protection provided with the protection preserve the product quality, ensure minimal loss by evaporation, dilution, leakage, substitution, theft, contamination, attack, sabotage, fire, or damage to the environment. The above ground steel tanks and slash mission of the facility. Other particular consideration dictate the above ground tanks to be used in no covered buried vertical tank and then normally used in condos. Cut and covered tanks may be required in the dispensing system located in the clear zone of the explosive cordon area that conducted at economically operational mechanical analysis of the remote location of the pumping housing system from a hydrant system. Various construction cut in and covered tanks. 8.3.3 Design requirements. Fuel storage facilities provide with an operating reserve supply of the fuel. The types of the size of the storage tanks depend on the safety, economic, serious activity, locality, intended service provided with a separate storage for each of the type of the grade of the fuel. For the aviation facilities provided with a minimum of 2 tanks for each of the type of the fuel. 8.3.4 Storage capacity. The capacity size of the fuel storage tank is based upon the logistical mission of the requirements of the facility. Any other facility would be supported from it, and from a state of the volume of each of the fuel for the fewer tanks of the larger size would result in the maximum economy. The appropriate service headquarters for the DESC DLA approval to determine the number of the size of the tanks requires rule of thumb and guidance of the operation stored in bulk. Storage capacity is available for the Navy UFC01005P 05NP80, provided a minimum of 2 tanks of aviation activities. Each type of the aviation turbine fuel to receive isolated news receipts until tested and checked for the quality and quantity, while the facility continues to function with the shock on hand and general capacity for individual tanks should not exceed 50% of the total storage volume required for each of the type of the grade of fuel to provide with the tanks of the capacity greater than 100,000 barrels, except for the larger tanks that are specifically authorized for the service headquarters. 8.3.5 Tank spacing. 8.3.5.1 Vertical tanks provided with the minimal distance between the shell of the vertical tanks, both above ground and underground, are not less than 1 diameter of the larger tank. 8.3.5.2 Horizontal underground tanks that provided with the minimum clearance between the shells and adjacent horizontal underground tanks between of minimum 3 feet. Of 3 feet. 8.3.5 Horizontal above ground tank, single wall and double wall steel. Non-fire resistant, non-protected, provided with the minimal clearance between the above ground horizontal tank with the capacity of 40,000 gallons or under this flow follows. A range tank that repairs minimum of 5 feet between the tanks, as each pair with the 10 feet between the adjacent tanks of the 2 pairs in the same row. The space adjacent groups and will group more than 2 pairs of the single row, but at least 20 feet between the nearest tank of the groups. Provide a minimum of the end-to-end spacing between the tanks in longitudinal rows of 20 feet. Provide a UL nameplate with the tanks stating the tanks are approved for material and service in addition with requirements listed with the paragraph. Tanks located in the facility governed by the NFPA 30A, such as marinara motor fuel dispensing facilities should apply within the NFPA 30A. 8.3.5.4 Horizontal above ground tanks, fire resistant, provide minimal clearance spacing between the fire resistant secondary container with the above ground horizontal tank in compliance with the NFPA 30 and NFPA 30A is applicable. 8.3.5.5 Horizontal above ground tanks protected, provided minimum clearance of space between the protected secondarily contained above ground horizontal tank in compliance with the NFPA 30 and NFPA 30A is applicable. 8.3.6 The distance of the building and the property lines. Locate the tank sufficient distance from the buildings and property lines to prevent the ignition of the vapors from the tank, to protect buildings and their occupants for the contents from the damage by the tank of the fire. To assume the maximum internal pressure for the fire and a fire exposure will not exceed 2.5 psi gallons is minimum. Comply with the requirements for the following paragraphs. 8361 underground tanks. Located underground tanks with respect to the building, similar structures to the soil, the pressure generated with the building foundation will not be transmitted to the tank and pumping facilities, which are often located directly above the ground. Tanks are accepted located horizontal cylindrical tank less than equal or 12 feet in the diameter, not less than 10 feet from the nearest point of the adjacent building of the nearest property line. Local vertical underground tanks at least 25 feet from the nearest point of the adjacent building of the 50 feet with the nearest property line. 8362 above ground tanks. Located above ground tanks with the consideration of fire safety. The first consideration prevent ignition of the vapors from the tanks. The second consideration is to protect the building and the occupants of the contents from the damage by a tank or fire. It is a protective measure provided with all the above ground tanks. Some of the form of the emergency relief venting for the fire exposure in accordance with the NFPA 30 of the following assumed with all the tanks constructed and equipped so that the maximum internal pressure of the fire exposure will not exceed 2.5 psi. Recommended the minimal distances above ground for the tanks, building, and property lines as follows. Tanks in all sizes of types are not protected with the fire resistant containing the petroleum fuels with a flash point of less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, one or more of the tank's diameter, which is greater. 100 feet, one or more of the tank diameter, whichever is greater. The tank is located in facilities governed by the NFPA 30A. With such a marine motor discipline facility should comply with the NFPA 30A. Tanks not protected with the fire resistant containing petroleum fuels in which the flash point is 100 degrees Fahrenheit is greater in accordance with the following. Tank capacity, minimum the distance nearest property line, feet, the minimum distance near building, feet. Anywhere from 275 feet to 50,000 feet or more. For above ground fire resistant tanks, the facility is governed by the NFPA 30 and 30A NFPA 30A guidelines. For above ground protected tanks, use the NFPA 30 guidelines protected with the tanks located in a facility governed by the NFPA 30A, such as marine motor fuel dispensing facilities should comply with the NFPA 30A. 837 distance to the roadway, railroads, and power lines. Minimum distance to the storage tank with adjacent roadway, the railways, roads, and overhead electrical power lines are as follows. 837 underground tanks. Located underground tanks with the respective buildings, similar structures so that the soil pressure created with the building foundation will not be transmitted to the tank pumping facilities, which are often located directly above the underground tanks, or accepted spacing clearance for the above underground tanks that would be in accordance with the most conservative NFPA 30 for as follows. A minimum of 25 feet with the regular travel roads and highways, not including tanker farm, utility, fire access road, 25 feet from the railroad super tracks not used for the railroad traffic, not less than 100 feet from the mainline railroad tracks with the carrying through the traffic, 50 feet for the overhead electrical power transmission distribution wires. 8372 above ground tanks, the greater of 100 feet, one tanker diameter from the regular travel roads with the highways, not including the tanker farm, utility, and fire access roads. 50 feet from the railroad spur tracks that are not used for the thorough traffic. 200 feet from the main railroad tracks carrying through traffic. 50 feet from the overhead electrical power transmission distribution lines from above ground fire resistant tanks in facility governed by the NFPA 30 and NFPA 30A guidelines. For above ground protected tanks, the NFPA 30 guidelines protected tanks located in the facilities governed by the NFPA 30A, such as the marine motor fuel and dispensing facilities, should comply with the NFPA 30A. 838 distance from the tank of the truck to the tanker car offloading and loading facilities. Provide a minimum distance between the both above ground and underground storage tanks of not less than 50 feet from the tank of the truck with the tanker car offloading and the loading facilities. 839 interior coatings to extend with the life of the steel storage tanks coating. New tanks according with the following guidelines. Vertical tanks, all of aviation, diesel fuel, marine, F76 additive lube oil tank to ensure that the 100% coated with including the floor shell and the underside of the roof. Other products to coat the floor with the underside of the fixed roof and at the bottom of the 40 inches of the tank shell. Additional coating with up to 100% requires economic justification service headquarter approval. Horizontal tanks for all products in tank interior should be 100% coated for all products coated with the interior exterior with the carbon steel piping located inside the tank and steel appurtenancy inside all tanks. 8.3 exterior coatings protect either the surface of all the above ground steel tanks by coating in accordance with the appropriate guidelines specification protect the exterior surface of all underground horizontal steel tanks to the factory applied with the coating specified with the appropriate PI with the specifications. Fiber protected tanks with exterior steel contamination consider exterior fiberglass cladding for extreme corrosive atmosphere and seaside fillings. 8311 filling piping size of the pipe so that the velocity does not exceed 12 feet per second at the maximum flow rate provides a means of reducing the velocity of flow to 3 feet per second until the filling inlet of the nozzle in completing the submerged and the floating pan has lifted off its legs. 8312 vapor emission control system provided with the vapor emission control system for the tanks to store product having the true vapor pressure of 0.75 psi or more, located with the air pollution in the control areas and discharge petroleum vapors and control prohibited to ensure that the system has sufficient capacity to control the vapor discharge for the tank's vents at a minimum, in fact, maximum filling rate of conformance with the local air quality regulations. If the gasoline is being handled, provided with a minimum of stage 1 vapor to recover the piping of the stage 2. If not required, of local and state regulation at the time of the construction, connect the stage 2 piping to the tank at the cabinet and the dispensers. 8313 strapping tables provided with the API MPSMS 2 certified strapping table to avert all tanks. The registered professional engineering must approve of the strapping tables. Use 1 16th of an inch increment readings in the gallons. Provided electronic media data vials. Determine strapping table volumes using the physical measurement non-calculated values. 81314 product recovery system. 81314-1 the general design consideration provided with the pumps, piping, valve, the tanks to collect the store and unstore unusable aviation turbine for the fuels, but otherwise becomes waste for operational maintenance activities. Consider the product the recovery for other products, including a tank to collect the fuel, water fixture for the tank of the equipment, the sumps, the equipment drains, the product saver tanks, and the high point of the vents, the lowest drains, and any other equipment from the fuel water. Make sure that it can be collected, separated the fuel and water portions. Filter the fuel portion from the returning the operation storage test. Tanks do not discharge the water portions of the surface water without additional treatment that permits the treatment of the water portion with the wastewater. Refer to Chapter 2 of the UFC with the information handling the wastewater. Refer to the DoD standard design AW7824-28. Those systems are standard with the hydrant in the aircraft directing fuel system. 813-14-2 product recovery tanks, hydrant aircraft directing fuel system provided with the tank indicated with the Department of Defense design standard AW7824-28 for other system provided with the tank with the minimum following appurtenancies: level gauge, overfill protection control valve, high level low switches which alarming controls motor driven fuel transfer pump. The returns recovered fuel back into the system through the hard pipe connection. Motor driven sump pump for the empty to the tank. Manual gauging hatch, vent, ATG system above ground product recovery tanks having capacity more than equal to 4,000 gallons. Do not allow the site of the flow indicators to be installed in the product recovery tanks. 83143 vertical storage tanks. In addition with the product recovery tanks, the facility all vertical storage pumps and the storage aviation turbine fuel, but included with the product saver tank with the electrical pump. Then less tank that is equipped with the filter separated to remove the water from the pump from the sump. A product saver tank that is a small above ground tank of the pipe with the valve and allowed the drawing water from the bottom of the storage tank at the returning the pump, returning the product after the water has been separated with disposing in accordance with the environmental regulations. 8315 registration. All tanks of the appropriate state and local agencies are required. All tanks there shall have a nameplate installed in accordance with the API standard 650. Alright, 8.4 horizontal above ground tank, single wall steel. 841 general design construction. A small factory built with an above ground storage tank that are required to use a horizontal tank with a link tank and diameter of 12 feet, less than the capacity is less than the 50,000 gallons. Required the tank to be while the construction in accordance with the UL for 142 plastic fiber gas above ground storage tanks are not allowed. Requirements for the horizontal above ground storage tanks shall comply with the NFPA 30 Chapter 20 of the storage above ground storage tanks. Tanks located with the facility governed by the NFPA 30 and A, and the use of marine motor fuels dispensing facilities shall comply with the NFPA 30A. Installation. Install the tank so that the bottom of the slope downwards toward the one end of the slope with 1%. Locate the transfer pump suction pipe at the high end of the tank and locate the water draw off at the lower end of the tank. Provide protective boulders for the tanks not surrounding this by a dike. Provide water draw off the lines within each of the tank of our aviation fuel system, arranging the pipe so that the fuel of the tanks may be recirculated through filter separators. Refer to the facility plate 018. Provide steel tank with the steel saddles and skids accordance with the UL 142. The bottom of the tank is to be less than 12 inches above the grade to avoid the need for the fireproofing. The mounted steel supports on the reinforced concrete foundation. Required tanks to be inspected with the STI registered and inspected with the level 1-2 certification prior to the tanks being put into service. Alright, 8.5 horizontal above ground tanks, double wall steel. General design description: limited tank diameter to 12 feet, less than capacity, less than 50,000 gallons. Required the tank to be welded steel construction in accordance with the UL 142. No fiberglass above ground storage tanks are allowed. To maintain advantage for the double wall steel storage tanks over the single wall steel. The storage tanks, the separate spill contaminated may not be required. NFPA 30 and NFPA 30 with the specific criteria with the amended spill contaminants with using the fill. This type of secondary contaminant type with all criteria of the NFPA regulations or appropriate applications must be met by this type of the tank is used for the split containment with requirements for the double wall steel horizontal above the ground storage tank shall comply with the NFPA 30. Chapter 22 above the ground storage tanks located at the facility governed by the NFPA 30A. Use of marine motor fuel dispensing facility shall comply with the NFPA 30A. 852 installation for flammable liquid installations required additional curbing the containment based on the tanking filling rates is thereby chance of the fuel spilling enter into a critical area. Install the tank so at the bottom of the slope downward towards one end of the slope at 1%. Locate the transfer pump, the suction piping at the higher end of the tank. Locate the water draw off at the lower end of the tank. Provide water drain up the light lines of each tank of the aviation fuel system, arranging the piping so that the fuel in the tanks may be recirculated through the filter separated. Provide protective bollards for the tank if not surrounded by the dike. Provide a steel tank with the steel saddles and skids. Accordance with the UL-142, the bottom of the tank is to be at least 12 inches above the grade to avoid the need for a fireproofing mounting steel supports of the reinforced concrete foundation require the tank to be pressurized, tested after installation. Require the tanks to be inspected with the STI registered and inspected with a level 1-2 classification prior to the tanks being put into service. Alright, 8.6 horizontal above ground tanks fire resistant. General description consideration when small to 250 to 20,000 gallons of capacity above ground storage of the tanks required, but they're clean for the fire exposure problems. The additional cost justified with consider the use of the fire restraint storage tanks. The main advantage with the fire restraint resistant tanks is over the single wall steel tanks. Separate spill contamination may not be required with the valve. The system provides an additional measure for the fire protection. NFPA 30 and NFPA 30A have specific criteria for limiting spill contamination when using the type of the secondary contaminant type tank. With all the criteria of the NFPA regulations, the appropriate application must be met before the type of the tank is used without spill contamination. Require the tanks to be factory constructed with a UL-142 welded steel primary tank. Generally low profile, rectangular in design. Tanks may be used in applications where, in addition to the above, the consideration construction separate spill contamination system, the secondary containment for purposes will have negative impact on the operation or aesthetics of tanks located close to the building. Integral fuel dispensing sensors must be in the UL listed secondary contamination tanks. Utilizing steel inner and outer tanks that can be provided interstitial consistency or interstitial contaminant, which is both pressure and testable and verifiable. Such tanks usually have the fill regulator insulation concrete. Ensure the 2-hour fire rating meets the exceeding all requirements of the NFPA 30A. The fire resistant tanks must meet the requirements of the UFC010 provided with a minimum of 2-hour fire rating in accordance with the UFC010 or the UL-2080. 862 installation for the flammable liquid installation require the additional curbing and containment based on the on-tank the filling rates of the desired, but the chance of the fuel spill entering the critical area. Install the tank so that the bottom slopes downward toward one end of the slope at 1%. Locate the transfer pump, the suction piping at the higher end of the tank. Locate the water draw off at the lower end of the low end of the tank. Provide the water draw off the lines of each of the tank for aviation fueling system. They arrange with the piping so that the fuel in the tanks may be recirculated through the filter suppressor. Primarily, the tank's stainless steel can be allowed, but those also may obtain the interior coated carbon steel with all applications that are economically justified. Require that the support of the channels with the anchor hold for the earthquake, hurricane, and flood resistant tie down. Require steel with the minimum thickness of 3/16 of an inch for the interior carbon steel tank. Provide protective bollards in the traffic areas. Require the tank to be pressure tested after installation. Require the tanks to be inspected with the STI registered and inspected with the level 1 class certification prior to the tanks being put in service. 8.7 horizontal above ground tanks, protected tanks. 871 generated design consideration. I'm going to quit there for today.